In this webinar, we shared insights into the recently published report, Impacts of Circular Approaches on Emissions, Jobs and Other Factors. This report was prepared by the Sustainable Business Network, SBN, thinkstep-anz and Aurecon for New Zealand's Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, MBIE. Together with MBIE's Katherine Silvester, SBN's James Griffin and Aurecon's Jodie Briocut, our Head of Circular Economy, Jim Goddin, explored circular strategies for resource-efficient buildings and infrastructure, sustainable agriculture, and managing critical materials in manufacturing.
Let's get started with the session. Your hosts today are Katherine Silvester from MBIE, Jodie Briocut from Aurecon, myself from thinkstep, and James Griffin, who's the General Manager at SBN, Sustainable Business Network. What we're going to do today is we're going to go through a bit of a project background, so that'll be led by Katherine. I'll then take you on a bit of a deep dive on the impacts that were identified as part of this project, and then I'll hand over to Jodie, who will segue into one of the parallel pieces of work looking at advanced manufacturing, which used this project as a bit of a starting point. And then we'll finish up with James, who will take you through some of the collaborative efforts, the sort of what next part of the session, and then we'll finish with some key, questions and answers. So with that, let's hand over to Katherine.
Thank you, Jim. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi o te wā. I'm Katherine Silvester. I'm from MBIE. I'm a principal advisor in our economic strategy branch. I've been working in this area of circular economy for the last year and a half, and have led the commissioning of the research we're going to hear about today. So just some setup points here. It was last August that we commissioned this research, and it was one of actually 7 research projects that we have commissioned over the last year and a half or so, linked to the emissions reduction plan and designed at the time to inform the development of a circular economy and bioeconomy strategy, since being discontinued. Key to us at the time of starting this work was knowing that there was a reasonable amount of international literature, but that New Zealand has got quite a distinctive economy and geography and cultural settings, so that New Zealand specific research was really going to be important to us to understand what were the most effective approaches to emission reduction in our particular setting. So for this impacts research, for example, we were looking at the international literature, which so far only covers modelling research largely. And there was actually really quite wide-ranging estimates of the impacts of emission reduction that was possible. So for this one, we really were after a little bit more certainty about and New Zealand relevance to the evidence base. The other thing we knew at starting this research was that the data was going to be limited in quality and quantity. So we knew that there'd be challenges there, and that this research would necessarily have to bring in both quantitative and qualitative insights as well, and inevitably be part of an ongoing process, an iterative process of developing that evidence base. And we knew that from looking at what other countries had done in this space, Australia and Scotland, for example. So what are we doing with the research now? We are using the work to inform our research, and to inform our work rather, and making it available to other teams and agencies. We're publishing it on our webpage, and you'll see quite a number of the other reports there now, and there are several other reports still to come through. So keep an eye out for them. Pass back to you, Jim. Thank you very much, and thank you to you and the wider team for sharing the findings here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Katherine, for that great introduction, and thanks for all your support through the development of this work. I think it's a really exciting piece to have been involved in. So with that, we'll get into the deep dive and what this project is all about, and some of the results. Thank you, Katherine, for that great introduction, and thanks for all your support through the development of this work. I think it's a really exciting piece to have been involved in. So with that, we'll get into the deep dive and what this project is all about, and some of the results. So this is just a starting point. I've assumed that you all know what the circular economy is. I don't think we need to go into that. It's quite a common term now. But just to start, circularity exists at different scales. So obviously, it applies to at a global context, at a country level, at a regional level. It applies to individual sectors, to products, and to natural resources. And you can see some of the considerations that exist at those various scales here on the slide, whether it's stewardship, sovereignty, waste management and investment, competitiveness, safety, cost, brand image. Those considerations come in at different stages of circularity. What we're interested in this particular project is for New Zealand. What materials are we consuming? What waste is being produced? How does this then link to emissions, jobs, and risks? And importantly, if we become more circular, what might be the benefits of that? So this was the starting point of the project, and really the key question that we were trying to resolve. And the importance of this question is, as I said on the previous slide, it kind of cascades down into action between the specific industry sectors, particular businesses, particular material types, and it's a useful reference point then for taking this type of action. So looking at the whole of the economy, this is you'll see a number of these Sankey diagrams or flow diagrams within the report. This particular one looks at the whole of the New Zealand economy at a high level, so looking at individual types of materials and how they flow through the economy and where they end up. So overall, there was 182,000 kilotons of material flowing through the economy in 2019, which was our reference year for the pandemic. Of those materials, biomass was the most significant flow, which is perhaps unsurprising given the focus of New Zealand on the bioeconomy. So 64% of the total materials that flowed through the economy, just over 100,000 kilotons, were biological materials. The majority of those produced domestically, as you'll see from the diagram on the right, and a lot of those flowing through into food and feed for agriculture, as well as some flowing through into exports and some flowing through into materials that are kept in service, so things like building materials, textiles, those sorts of things. Also quite prominent in this diagram is the non-metallic minerals, that yellow slice of the diagram. So that includes things like aggregates and concrete and stone. A lot of the flows there are into material stocks. So these are the products that exist within our environment, the buildings, the roads, the bridges, the things that will remain in use for some considerable time potentially, but will eventually be decommissioned and come back into these flows as a waste or as a resource that we then need to consider further down the line. And that proved part of the difficult issue to resolve, because obviously we have a disconnect between the materials flowing into these stocks and the material flowing out, which may be the materials we put in 50 or more years ago. The other thing that's prominent in this diagram is the flow through to landfill, and that's of particular interest, as we'll see in the next slide. So this is a waste diagram that focuses on the flow of materials that are considered waste into the different types of landfill. The project you'll hear about later on advanced manufacturing expands this further, so there is further detail that you'll see later on in this deck. But the important thing here is the level of recovery down the bottom here is less than 1%. So we're not really recovering a lot of the materials that are being sent to waste. Of the materials that we are recovering, about half of those are metals, which are predominantly exported for reprocessing outside of New Zealand, and the other half is processed domestically. And a lot of those are biological materials like paper, some construction and demolition waste, small quantity of plastics, some organics. So we're not very circular as an economy at the moment. There's a huge amount of material that we're losing, and that's part of what we need to focus on and where some of the opportunities are. If we then look into some of the specific sectors, and we focused on 3 particular areas within this project, the first being New Zealand food flows. Now this is a very complicated diagram, and I'm not going to spend time going through all of it. Every time you look at these diagrams, you'll notice something different. But what I did want to focus on was really this flow. So we have a lot of imported materials, particularly grain and seed for livestock in particular. That livestock is a mixture of cattle for milk as well as cattle and sheep for meat. And you can see those flowing through into that third bubble, and a large proportion of that is exported from New Zealand. So we have quite a heavy dependency on imports to support the production of meat and dairy, and a large chunk of that is exported from New Zealand. So it makes a significant contribution to the New Zealand economy as part of that export market. What's not shown on here is this area. The reason we didn't include grazed biomass and fodder crops in this diagram is because of the value, that 75, almost 76,000 kilotons, which in relation to everything else in the diagram is so huge that it would dwarf everything else on the screen. So there is a lot of biological materials that are flowing into meat and dairy industry as well, from the growth of grass and grain and fodder crops that go to support that livestock. So this is an important flow within the economy, and something that we paid attention to, particularly in terms of the materials that are required to support this industry. The other area we looked at is energy. So I apologize for the small text. Hopefully you can read that. But in summary, in 2019 we consumed just over 1,000 petajoules of energy. 66% of that was non-renewable, so it was oil, gas, coal, and of that, 55% of it was imported. So we have a strong reliance on imported fossil fuels to power our economy. If you look at things like oil, 85% of the oil we consumed in 2019 was imported, and half of that went to support domestic transport. The other 17% was international transport, and then smaller fractions into industrial applications, non-energy use applications. We're still using some coal. 24% of that was imported. We are also exporting some of that, I believe, and some of that flows into industrial uses. So particularly for production of steel, for example, and a small amount into energy use. So we have a heavy reliance on fossil fuels still, and a heavy reliance on imported fossil fuels in particular. If we look at buildings, which is the third area, you have two diagrams. The one on the left focuses on the material flows, so the masses that we see flowing through the economy. The diagram on the right looks at the emissions that are associated with those materials. And what you'll spot from those diagrams is on the left, we have a very significant contribution from concrete and aggregates, so the green and the red lines, particularly flowing through into non-residential and residential construction as well. So that is by a very significant flow by mass, and also looking at the diagram on the right, the green line and the very small red line. The use of concrete is also quite significant in terms of embodied impact. But what shows up in the right-hand diagram is a greater emphasis on the use of metals. So the environmental impacts associated with metal use within the economy are more significant by mass. And so that is also an important area to focus on. You'll also spot from the bottom of the diagrams, there wasn't very much recycling that was evident. We have some fairly minor flows through into waste and landfill. Those are actually quite significant when you look at the volumes. But the amount of material that we're recovering through reuse and recycling is very negligible. And that, again, is an opportunity to intervene. So in terms of the opportunities that exist, there are many opportunities that we could have gone into. The modelling for each of those opportunities does take quite a lot of time, but we developed an initial set of opportunities that were based on the team view. So that was the view of ThinkStep, of Aurecon, of SBN, and other stakeholders that we engaged with through some of the other projects. These opportunities are very much the starting point for this work, but I think it's quite an encouraging starting point. In developing these opportunities, we look very much at supply and demand-led opportunities. So supply-led opportunities are circular economy interactions which aim to maintain the flow of materials. So to keep materials flowing through at equivalent volumes. So things like recycling and regenerative production of biological materials are in the supply-led category. Demand-led categories look at really reducing the flow. So how do we keep products in use for longer? How do we reuse them or remanufacture them so that we don't have to import or consume as much of those materials as a whole? So how do we decouple from those flows more fundamentally? So the opportunities we identified really are here listed on screen. So if we look at buildings, sustainable agriculture, and also critical minerals, critical materials, within the construction sector, we looked at interventions like increasing the use of buildings through multi-purpose or shared spaces. This is one of the circular economy strategies that was highlighted by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and by Briocut. There are a whole pile of additional interventions that could have been quantified. The two that we did quantify were water management and the use of organic fertilizers. Water management is important because we spend a lot of energy pumping water out of the ground and pumping it around and distributing it. It is a cost, it has an economic impact. So through reducing the consumption of water, being more targeted with water, we identified environmental savings of between 113 and 226,000 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. Through these sort of local organic fertilizers, there are a lot of fertilizers that we use in New Zealand that are imported, that rely on finite resources, particularly of phosphate, which is an area of concern for multiple critical minerals strategies in the longer term. How do we decouple from those imports and use more of our own locally produced organic fertilizers? And through doing that, how can we reduce the environmental impacts by targeting the use of those fertilizers more carefully and decoupling from supply chain risks that are associated with that import reliance? And then on the topic of critical minerals or critical materials, we look particularly at product durability. So New Zealand has a strong dependence on technology metals and on technology materials in particular. So if we look at things like electronics, manufacturing equipment, vehicles, a lot of those products are imported. We have a limited number of interventions that we can apply to that because we're not in control of the production of those products. But what we can do is extend the service life of those by using them more carefully, by making sure that they are designed to last and to be reused. And there are environmental savings associated with those. So each of these strategies is detailed in a lot more depth within the report. So I hope you'll go through that and understand where those interventions are coming from and where the opportunities exist. Altogether, those opportunities on the screen represent between 2.7 and 3.4% reduction on the 2021 emissions of New Zealand. Most of these interventions have strong links to economic resilience, for example, through the decoupling from critical materials, and on job creation, for example, through remanufacturing and reuse. And a lot of those opportunities are also outlined in the report. There are some other opportunities that were longer term, that not necessarily per annum. So if we look at vehicle sharing and reuse, we identified between 13 and 20,000 kilotons of CO2 equivalent savings that could be achieved by 2050. This is one of those quantifications that was difficult to target to a specific time frame, so we couldn't report it on a per annum basis. But cumulatively, there is a significant opportunity between now and 2050 to use things like vehicle sharing and component reuse in vehicles to deliver much more significant environmental savings, and also through things like extended building durability, so designing products to last, designing buildings to last longer, could deliver another 1,500 kilotons of CO2 equivalent per annum. But we would have to wait until the end of those, but when those buildings would normally have exited use to be able to start realizing those. Both of those examples represent really significant opportunities. but there are investments that we would need to make now for future benefit. So we can't really wait until 2050 to start acting on these. But some of these we would have to wait longer to actually reap the benefits of them. So coming back to what Katherine was saying at the beginning, this is a starting point. We don't have all the data that we want. A lot of the data we had to deal with was either inconsistent or missing or confidential. But the data we have managed to pull together shows us where to concentrate, enables us to ask some questions, gives us a great place to start. Hopefully it catalyzes some action, and it will prompt additional data collection to help us resolve and improve the picture that we do have. This is a new thing for New Zealand. It's the first time anyone has done this in the New Zealand context, and it's the start of a journey. The data that's presented is there to be enhanced, to be updated, and to be challenged. And the interventions are there to be modelled and to be built upon and again challenged. There are a lot of other opportunities that we didn't manage to resolve, and it'd be great to see that work expanded and developed further. Also, beside this, we've been looking at things like Indigenous rights and perspectives. This is an area that is very underdeveloped in the circular economy space internationally. There's already quite strong leadership from New Zealand in this area, and obviously a strong alignment with the circular economy principles. We also needed to look at things like distributional impact. Some of the environmental savings may be offshore, so we may be enacting circular economy principles in a way that doesn't necessarily impact our own emission reduction targets, but may impact emissions we import from other countries. Some of the impacts on other regions are both positive and negative. So we might be driving changes in trade. Some of them may be short-term versus long-term, and we need to look at a just transition. So how do we couple economics, jobs, environment, and bring all of those together holistically as part of the circular economy approach? So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass over to Jodie, who will take you through the next section. Jodie.
Thanks so much, Jim. That was really great. I hope everyone enjoyed that sneak peek. Well, not a sneak peek, because I'm giving you a sneak peek of the next bit with ThinkStep and with SBN. So I'm from Aurecon. We're a big engineering firm, and I lead the circular economy team. I'm based in Adelaide, Australia, which is on Ghana country. And this was our first really big circular economy project in New Zealand, and it was really exciting for us because it got to bring together our experts that are working on the ground every day on mostly net zero kind of decarbonisation projects with the manufacturing sector, and really get them across the importance of circular economy in the net zero context as well. So we delivered this piece of work again in collaboration with ThinkStep and with SBN. And this is just a glimpse because it may or may not be published online, maybe or maybe not in July. It's all up in the air, but fingers crossed it will be published soon and you'll be able to have a look. So once you're finished reading the first report full of wonderful Sankeys and you've had a look at this amazing research piece on digital aspects as well, which we did again in this partnership, then you can get on to having a look at what a deep dive looks like in one sector of the kind of work that Jim's been talking us through up to now. So the objective of this work, and the very catchy title, is mapping emission and waste stream profiles and opportunities for achieving net zero circular advanced manufacturing. It's not very catchy, but every word in that title of this project is really, really important. So the objective was to really provide a baseline at quite a granular level of emissions and waste flow data from what is an extremely complex industry and sector. It was in the context of all these other projects as well that were done in parallel. So Jim's project that he's just walked through came first. And what we did is kind of took the results of the project one data and then kind of tried to get a lot more granular. So we did a lot of subsector mapping. Everything that Jim said about the challenges of working with missing and imperfect data was absolutely the same with this one. So we were working with this high top-down data, but then also trying to ground truth it and bring up data from the ground, literally, and seeing how they meet in the middle. So there was a lot of iteration there to get something that made sense. We were also considering existing decarbonisation and circular manufacturing practices and trends. And then we did quite a bit of testing with industry. So we did a workshop with more than 60 attendees and a lot of one-on-one interviews with manufacturers. So what we've done in this piece of work is identified data gaps around this and provided a number of recommendations to address these. We've really demonstrated the potential to value these insights of data set over time, and this will help the manufacturing and industry invest in circular and net zero strategies in the future. And we've done a lot of barrier and opportunity identification and mapping so they can understand where they need to be investing. So we looked at 7 very, very different subsectors, and they make up 10% of your economy in New Zealand. So food and bev is obviously massive, machinery, equipment, metals, chemical refining, paper, wood, plastics and rubber, other manufacturing, which includes textile, furniture, cement, glass and ceramics. So this is just what they look like in terms of how big they are financially. But if you can imagine, we map down into each and every one of these sectors to understand where materials do and don't flow and where some of the hotspots are. So a really important starting point was taking, you saw this diagram earlier, Jim, well, a version of it, with the waste generated in New Zealand, and then having a look at how those materials flow through the different types of landfill, whether that be municipal solid waste or construction demolition, for example, and what kind of materials may be available that are currently going to landfill and how could they be used in industry. And then have a look at understanding what is already diverted and how that's processed inside and outside of New Zealand. So there was a lot of having a look at what those diversion opportunities are, how to enhance that local recovery, and also the data gaps involved in the waste generation data that we have at that level. So I've given a very sneak peek at findings intentionally, because if you haven't figured that out, I want you to download the report and get really excited about it when it comes out. There was some incredible spatial mapping that was done at the subsector. So each of those 7 sectors had between sort of 2 and maybe 8 different subsectors. So the level of granularity was quite impressive. The amount and richness of data for every one of those subsectors and sectors varies a lot, which gives an indication to the complexity of this project and also how deep we were able to go in different sectors. But we give some really impressive sort of spatial mapping of where these sectors are strong and where the activity is coming from. And we've also mapped the emission profiles across New Zealand as well. So that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of emission profiling data in there at every sector and subsector level. And then some really incredible flow mapping. So again, if you're a fan of Sankey diagrams, you're going to love this report. You can bore your partner with it like I do. But a lot of flow mapping, and sometimes that's the flow of carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions through the different parts of the supply chain. Some of it's material and waste flows. And it kind of depends a little bit on the sector, what kind of flows. So that was my glimpse to get you excited to download this report. And that's pretty much all I had to say. So really big sneak peek at what's coming next and how this high level overarching data kind of really pulls down and becomes meaningful at one sector level and should provide a really good basis from moving forward. So now I would love to hand over to James, if I can figure out how to stop sharing. James, are you still with us?
I am.
Fantastic.
Kia ora koutou. I'm James from the Sustainable Business Network. I will share my screen. And by way of introduction, I've been leading the work at the SBN since around the circular economy since 2014. So I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, but it is a thing. Now, what I want to really just say a few words about the collective responsibility that we all have as a result of this research. And I'm going to start off, if I can change screen, with this image. And there's a couple of reasons I've started off with this image. One is because I thought a beautiful image might be a respite from the wonderful but quite data-heavy sand keys that you've been seeing throughout this presentation. So I hope you appreciate that. It's quite a gorgeous picture. But the other thing is it helps to illustrate a point, because when I was putting these slides and thoughts together, it reminded me of a story that an incoming CEO had at an organization I used to work for in a previous life in the UK, which is a large multinational FMCG company. And he came in and told us a story of two people who were taking a hot air balloon ride. And as beautiful as it was, they became lost. They're getting a bit panicky. They thought, well, rather than just carrying on forever, let's land and see if we can orientate ourselves that way. They ended up landing in a field. Next to that field, they saw a cyclist cycling past. Guys in the balloon said, "Oh, excuse me, sir, can you tell us where we are? We're a bit lost." The cyclist said, "Yeah, for sure. You're in the middle of a field." And the guys in the balloon said, "Oh, okay, thanks. By any chance, do you work in market research?" And the cyclist said, "Yeah, actually, I do. How did you know?" And the people in the balloon said, "Well, what you've told us is absolutely accurate, but it's absolutely useless." And so, although I don't agree with all of that sentiment, it does illustrate the point, to me anyway, that it's actually what we do with this research that is going to make a difference. So we've got it was about 90 people on this call, and another 90 almost registered, who I presume are going to watch the video highlights later. And we have a collective responsibility to use this research as a springboard for action, because certainly that's why this consortium actually put our hand up to do this work, not just for the sake of the numbers, but we want to drive action. So what I thought I'd do is share some of the collective action that SBN is facilitating. And again, I'm trying to change screen, but managed there. One of the things, and it's a big feature of the work we've been seeing, is in the built environment. So we've been working alongside the construction sector accord and working on a number of things there with industry around trying to help realize some of those opportunities that Jim has highlighted. One is around product stewardship, and then the other is around integrated design and how we can effectively provide an intervention where all of the value chain actually contribute to at the design stage together, so that better outcomes, less waste can be achieved by the collective intelligence of that value chain working together at the design stage. We also have hundreds of circular solutions available right now the businesses can tap into via the circular economy directory, and it's something we obviously want to grow in terms of number of solutions, because we want to effectively grow the market share of those organizations who can help others become increasingly circular. We know that all the solutions don't yet exist, so we have the Challenge Hub, where we will effectively open source solutions to New Zealand for challenges that we encounter throughout our work where there isn't currently an obvious solution. And this is open to everyone, not only to put their challenges on, but to provide their solutions too. We are playing a role in helping organizations take steps with regard to their climate journey. So we've had over 50,000, 55,000, in fact, 55,001 apparently, businesses who have used our climate action toolbox, which is on business.gov.nz to start and maintain their journey around decarbonisation. And in the regenerating nature space, which is a core component of the circular economy, doesn't always get the focus that it should do. There is some significant metrics and impacts from our work around restoring our natural environment. And it's not only SBN, of course, there's multiple organizations that are looking at collectively trying to achieve the acceleration of our economy to a circular one. And so really it's an opportunity. We want this research to be a catalyst for that action.
That's great. Thank you, James. So that brings us to the end of our session. So we have a couple of questions that have been submitted. So I guess the first question really is from Paul Starr in terms of the similarities and differences between carbon benefits of the circular economy and those that are currently underway in Australia. And he was asking whether dietary measures were considered, such as eating less carbon-intensive foods, equivalent to the UK work that was identified. Were these considered? I don't think we really, if I take that question, I don't think we really considered changes in diet. I think we were more focused on the flow of materials through the current economy. I think the challenge, perhaps, with the New Zealand economy is the proportion of food that is exported. So that New Zealand is a big export market for food and beverage. So the question is less about how we change the way we consume. I think that New Zealand is very self-sufficient for what we do consume here. The challenge is how do we change the economics without causing too much disruption, because as we've seen, meat and dairy are major export markets for New Zealand. How do we reduce the environmental impacts associated with that through circular economy without disrupting the economic benefits that New Zealand already reaps from those exports, which is why we focus more on how do we decouple from things like water consumption and fertilizer consumption. How do we decarbonize the production that we do have in a way that's effective and delivers greater resilience. The other question from Anna, in terms of data gaps, what data was missing and thoughts on how this could be remedied. I'm happy to take that, but Jodie, do you want to provide any insights from the other project as well, because that's also relevant?
Yeah, well, on a very granular side, so I'm just having a look at some of the key data gaps that weren't necessarily hugest, but so we don't have data on plastic litter associated with plastic products that might be manufactured and imported into New Zealand, for example. So it's really hard to understand how much plastic is actually coming into New Zealand and then not being captured by waste systems. So that's a very small but important one. But then there were certain areas around, so like chemicals and refining and packaging is always really, really tricky because so much comes in. And then a bit of gaps around data from waste facilities as well. So there was a lot of different data gaps, but everywhere you poke, you found a few, right, Jim?
Yeah, very much so. The sort of data challenges we had were around inconsistency. So trying to marry different data sets. There were some particular gaps around materials that were in current service. So we lacked a lot of information on the technology materials that were imported, the things that weren't manufactured here but were in the goods that we consume. And we're also aware that things like water were particular flows that we should have been quantifying more, but again, there's a lack of data. The circularity of water is a very important consideration, but it becomes multifaceted very quickly when we deal with things like water quality and availability in different regions. And we just lacked the granularity we need to assess that at that level of detail. And some of the internal flows, in terms of the existing recovery of vehicles, we lack data on the age of vehicles that are currently on the road. We lack visibility over when those will exit their reasonable service life, and same with buildings. We don't really have a clear view on what the age of the buildings and infrastructure we have are in order to model when those might come to the end of their service, and what when the benefits from some of these circular economy interactions might manifest. So there are all sorts of gaps like that, which would be great to resolve at some point, but it's all about part of that journey of improving the visibility we have. Perhaps a question for James. I think we're drawing to the end now, but there's another question from Anna in terms of what the main challenges to increasing circularity are in New Zealand, and if there are any countries that are making significant progress towards transitioning to a circular economy. Are you happy to say that one, James?
Yeah, I can answer that. I can give a viewpoint on that briefly. There is, we've identified that there are really, I'd say, 6 key intervention points, levers that we need to pull, broad levers. And the first is that design element. So get involved and influence at the start. So that's where the integrated design in the construction is sort of playing a role. There's also, but however, how much influence do we have on the design of certain products in New Zealand when a lot of it is imported is somewhat of a challenge we hear. The other side of that coin is the pull through of these circular solutions and the procurement, and how there is a bit of a disconnect between the sort of sustainability aspirations of organizations and what happens on the procurement side. And that's something that is recognized and trying to make an influence, produce an influence on. I mean, government procurement, everyone says is a key driver. The ability to for businesses to actually change their business models to be more circular is actually pretty tough to change business model. The infrastructure we have in a country that is with a small population, geographically dispersed, it's actually quite difficult to get materials moved efficiently around the country. How we can embrace technology to get us where we need to get to in an efficient way. But the key thing is, and it's maybe slightly ironic, is legislation that is really going to drive significant change. So that is where we're seeing, like say, the European Union and countries, and they're making more progress, where they've got a legislative viewpoint that is more conducive to actually, moving to an economy that is closer to a circular one, rather than maintaining a very a short-termist current business as usual.
Fantastic, thanks for that, James. But yeah, with that, I'd like to thank our speakers for today. Thank you, Jodie, Katherine, James, and the team for putting this together, and for everybody involved in delivering this work. It's been a great fun project to get stuck into. Yeah, there are some great opportunities to leverage the circular economy towards our emission reduction targets, and looking forward to what comes next. So with that, I'll thank everybody for attending, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
We have many more webinars on our website on a whole host of sustainability topics.